Good morning. How's everybody doing? Everybody good? Everybody good? Who's excited to hear Dr. Hampton speak? So you're probably wondering who I am, guys. So my name is Rebecca Babry, and I am the Assistant Production Manager for the documentary Healing Humanity. So I'm also a certified primal health coach. I'm also a nurse. I'm also a PhD coach for Dr. Ken Berry. And so what I'm here to you today is, I have the honor of telling y'all that you guys are the first ones to get to see a sneak peek of the documentary. So I got a couple housekeeping things, and I'm going to keep this as succinct as possible. So me and Dr. Hampton are actually a part of this documentary, and we're super excited about it. And housekeeping, please do not record it, because there's another group that gets to see it, Hack Your Health, but y'all get to see it first.
Yeah.
It's
the right event.
Yeah, I know, right? So does anybody here know who Carrie Mann is from Hampton? So he decided, carnivore changed his life, and he decided that he's going to do a documentary because he wanted more people to know how it can change people's life. And him and Adam Lacey of Carnivore Today got together, crowdfunded, and now we are doing this documentary. Nobody's getting paid for this documentary. It's 100% working for free. There's going to be a QR code that does come up. So feel free to go to that QR code and see what the documentary is about if you have more, want more information. But you can also donate if you want to. If not, please share it. Yeah. We need people to share this documentary. So, and then Dr. Hampton, do you have anything to add about the documentary?
No, other than at the end of the video, the QR code will come up, so make sure to be ready. But you can also just search Healing Humanity documentary, GoFundMe, and they have a website.
Yeah, and there are stickers on the back table that says Healing Humanity on it. That QR code will take you to the website. So, without further ado, here's the sneak peek. I'm excited, and I am recording this because Carrie wants to see your all's facial reactions.
All right, guys, thank you, Rebecca, for doing a great job teeing up the documentary.
Who's already donated to the movie?
Raise your hand. All right, okay, cool. Thank you so much. So just to tee myself up a little bit, some of you guys know me, some don't. I have a podcast called Protecting Your Nest. Right around the time of the pandemic, when I was bored, didn't have a lot to do, I decided to start a podcast and a YouTube channel, and I came out of my bubble of doing low-carb work in Chicago as a family doctor, obesity doctor, metabolic doctor, and the world didn't know who I was, and I just felt like, and I was, Dr. Ken Berry said, what are you doing? You need to, expand your audience and teach more people. So that's kind of how I ended up in front of you, and I feel privileged to do that. So I'm going to show the video, but today we're going to talk about fruit, and we all like fruit, but we're going to talk about why we should or shouldn't do that. So I'll go ahead and play the movie.
Hello, Gary here from Healing Humanity. A proper human diet has changed my life forever. Not only am I down over 100 pounds since my heaviest, I also overcame depression and anxiety and many. I'm going on a journey to help others do the same.
I've been a doctor for nearly 30 years now.
We've all been misled for so long.
They gave me pills for anxiety, they gave me pills for depression.
Our bodies are so deficient and so malnourished that of course you're going to get diseases, of course you're going to get sick.
I believe that I may have caused my cancer.
It is no way to live. It's a nightmare.
I was just so hopeless for so many years. It just kills me to know that the answer was out there the whole time.
The food that we're eating nowadays is simply not food. Just because we put it in our mouths and we chew it and swallow it doesn't make it food.
We can sit back and we can say the bloody doctors, it's not their fault. They were trained and and they're doing what they were trained to do.
The thing that really pisses me off is that the people that we should have been able to trust, the literal organizations that we look up to protect us, are the people who have done the majority of the misleading.
I'm 82 years old, which is just a chronological number. You put the right fuel in the engine, and the engine works.
I've now transitioned from a disease manager to a disease killer. I've transitioned from a drug dealer to a killer.
3 weeks ago, I didn't know this man's Bill from Alaska. Bill is 700 pounds and he's been stuck in his house for 4 years. You nervous?
I'm nervous, Gary.
You know, I live in Alaska, the most incredible place on the planet. I had to have a toilet put, a few feet from my bed, which I can barely walk to as is. I have not been outside in over 4 years. This is life or death for me.
Sorry, I'm sorry, Gary. I'm sorry about that.
Here.
Thanks, dude.
Oh my gosh.
Oh my God.
Long time. I'm looking towards the future, which I have not had in such a long time. It's just the most incredible feeling.
Thank you for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed our preview. There's so many more stories out there that need to be told. If you want to learn more, if you want to contribute, if you want to support our efforts, please visit Healing Humanity.
Sorry about that. All right, guys. So, and one of the things that Dr. Kim Berry stated is that the other organizations weren't doing a great job, right? So that's why we decided to create the American Diabetes Society. So we were really excited. I'm so privileged to be part of that board that's going to start it. And as you can see, familiar faces, Michelle Hearn and Dr. Eric Westman, Dr. Berry, and I have to throw Dr. Ben Bigman in there. And I say that with hesitation because, is Dr. Brian still here? Yes. Dr. Brian Linskis, is he here? There he is. Now, I'll be honest with you, he brought up Dr. Ben Bigman's name so often, I think there's a little bit of a bromance. Seriously. In fact, I think I'm going to talk to his wife and Dr. Bigman's wife and have a conversation about how far this thing has gone. So I'm not going to go crazy with my presentation. I will mention him now, and I'll try not to mention him again. So we'll talk later, my friend. But again, this is another opportunity to help support this organization. So when people come to this site, they will have menus and recipes that make more sense. So, and again, we're not demonizing the other organization, but we have to do better than what they're doing. So that's there. Thank you. So let's talk about fruit, guys. Thank you. Fruit is beautiful, right? It's very appealing, very tasty, and very enjoyable. And fruit has a nickname. Anybody heard the nickname for fruit? Nature's candy, right? So that's why we love it so much. So if that's true, and we've been taught our entire lives, fruits and vegetables, my colleagues that work with me in Chicago, fruits and vegetables. So if that's all we know, it's very hard to deviate from that mindset. So there's a lot of perceived benefits, and of course you've all heard an apple a day will keep the doctor away. Who knew that this doctor would think that that was not the best statement anymore, right? And we thought that because of all the nutrients in fruit, right? All of the potassium. How many people know someone who eats a banana every day for potassium, right? But who really wants to look like that ape in the tree who eats a banana every day? If you think about their belly, right? That's not exactly a great source of potassium. And of course, we need fiber so we can have regular bowel movements, right? And of course, those antioxidants. And the only place you can get the antioxidants is in fruit. That's what we've been taught. So we have these perceived health benefits of fruit, which we've all been taught to believe in. And of course, we have the great Dr. Paul Saladino, who is well respected in the carnivore community, who has kind of done a 360 and gone from a strict carnivore diet to one where he adds fruit and honey. But when that happens and you respect somebody that much, you have to start to question. This is a very smart man. I still have his, his book in my audiobook file. So when you have an intelligent, well-respected person questioning fruit, you should question fruit. That's what we all should do. So let's do a little bit of that today. And again, I have his book, and what I loved about the carnivore code that he wrote is that it gave me permission. It was him and Dr. Berry and others who gave me as a doctor permission to attempt a diet that I thought was crazy at first, right? So, and I'm a carnivore, by the way, so I just want to put that out there. At least whenever I can. My wife's not making me eat her vegetables. Every once in a while, she's like, would you please eat this? I labored over this. Especially her yellow squash, she wants me to eat that. So what Dr. Paul Saladino has done is allowed us to question our beliefs about what we believe. And we never want to fall into a rabbit hole where we only believe what we believe. That is a dangerous place to be. And you also want to be skeptical. And if you think about it, 11 years ago is when I started my low-carb journey, and before that, we were vegetarian and vegan for 8 years. So if it wasn't for a skeptical brain, I would have stayed in that little rabbit hole with the Dr. Ornishes and the Esselsteins and the Colin Campbells of the world. I would have stayed in that because and the biggest mistake you can make is not to trust experts. You have to look at the science, and you always question what the experts say. I don't care who it is, because if you follow expert opinion, you can run into a little trouble. So never do that. That's a tip for the day. So as you look at this image of the dark side of fruit, it's clear that the main source of sugar in fruit is fructose, and it can, at times, for some people, raise concerns. And when I say that, I'm really framing it from the perspective of excess, but I always include my wife in my presentation, so I will do that now. Thank you for letting me do that, dear. She'll be our case study, and I'm going to kind of use her as an example. And my wife has adult onset diabetes, type 1, and that was a huge disappointment for her, because as a pharmacist, she knew that was what that meant. She would be on insulin, right? So let's think about that. When you think about the average person with type 1 diabetes in the United States, their average A1C is about 8.5. Okay, so that means their average blood sugar is 200. And we celebrate 31 years of marriage next month, okay? Yes. But the problem is this: if her average A1C is 8.5, she loses an average of 12 years of life, right? So how do we have additional anniversaries if that's true? And so we knew we had to do something different, and at the end of the day, we had to change how we eat. So if you think about it, you think about the harm that comes from fruit. And I think about the fruit that she liked to eat. Now, we start with this beautiful image, and that's kind of my wife when you go back to her childhood. And in Mississippi, where she grew up in the country, she would go to the farmer's market and get peaches. And literally, the way she described it was what you see on this image. She would take a bite, and the juice would just fall down her face. And it had to be sweet, just the right consistency. And this is not just how it tasted. This is like a memory from her childhood, right? And she's also in that South heat. So what do we eat in the South heat? Watermelon. Amen. Let me say amen one more time. Who doesn't like watermelon? And she literally described when you crack it open, the sound of the cracking open. And I don't know how she you have to tap it a certain way, make sure it's okay before, make sure it's sweet. I don't know what the secret is. But just that emotional experience that she had. And then of course, she was a huge fan of red seedless grapes, but they have to be cold and they have to be crispy.
Gotta have the right snap.
They have to have a snap to it, exactly. So my wife was an expert. So when you think about things that were important to her, I think it started with like God. Then it was the kids and myself, hopefully. In fact, I know it was the kids before me. All moms understand that. And then it was her family. But then I think somewhere on that list was fruit. Like fruit was important. Wasn't as high as God, but it was. So it was really a challenge and really a sacrifice. Nostalgic for her. And for me to say, no, you probably shouldn't. And we just had this conversation a few weeks ago. She had like a little orange something. She was like, I'm going to have this. I said, well, let's see how many carbs there are. So let's look at the fruit she loves and think about the carbs. And for the newbies in the room, it's important that you understand that when you see carbs, you can actually subtract or divide that number by 4 to estimate the teaspoons of sugar. So that delicious peach that's going down her face is 16 carbs divided by 4. It's 4 teaspoons of sugar. And of course, for the watermelon, a slice of that is 5 teaspoons of sugar. And of course, the grapes are in the 7 teaspoons of sugar range. Now, I love my wife a lot, but I've never imagined literally going up to her and saying, here's 6 or 7 teaspoons of sugar, and you have diabetes. So, but our doctors don't know this. And our patients definitely don't know it because, again, eat all the fruits and vegetables. If you've seen that, we just had a study saying keto versus DASH. And in the DASH diet, if you look at, they want you to have literally 5 to 10 servings of fruit every day. And if you think about that, it's ridiculous on its face. So anyway, so let's talk a little bit about how we were trained as clinicians. We were trained. If you have somebody like my wife with type 1 diabetes, all you have to do is match the insulin with the spike in the sugar. So it doesn't really matter what you eat, as long as those numbers are matching. The problem is when you're trying to estimate that, you're not going to get it right. And if you never heard of Dr. Bernstein or Type 1 Grit, those folk, they understand. That's a Facebook group. They understand that you can't match it. So if you look at, carb estimation being difficult, it's an understatement. So let's go back to the example of the grapes. If it's 28 carbs and that's 7 teaspoons of sugar, is it really 28 carbs? I mean, how do you really know it's 28 carbs, right? It may be 20, it may be 35. So now my wife has to give herself insulin based on this estimate. So she's either going to overestimate or underestimate. So she'll be hyperglycemic or hypo. And when that happens, she'll either be giving herself more insulin later, or she'll be adding more of the sugary stuff that she doesn't need in her body to get it back up. And that's the life of a person with diabetes. They're on a roller coaster, and you cannot be on a roller coaster and have a long life. And again, that explains why people lose so many years of life. And then number 2 says insulin variability. There are factors that affect the insulin. Have you ever thought about the fact that sometimes you go to the pharmacist and they say, we don't have the insulin you normally have, we had to replace it because there's a supply chain issue? Is it likely that the insulin from a different company is going to do the exact same thing that the insulin? No, it's very unlikely. And there's so many factors. So now we don't know how many carbs, and now I'm giving you some medicine. I'm not even sure if it's going to work the way the medicine did last time you had it. And then finally, that's going to be a mismatch. So I think that this is why it's so important that we, instead of have a 28 carb meal, we have a 2 carb, maybe if you're kind of worth 0, but a 2 or 3 or 4 carb meal. And it's easier to match that. And if it's easier to match it, the chances of a hyper or a hypo episode is way less. So that's really important. So let's think about other factors. So if we go back to the banana example, most of you are aware that if it's very ripe, it's going to have more sugar in it versus if it's not. So green versus yellow, that's an issue. And then, of course, how you cook it. So if I take, a lot of times when we eat peach cobbler, for example, right? Going back, I'm hitting that peach real hard. That peach. We look at it and say, well, at least I'm getting some fruit in my dessert, right? Your brain said, that's how we've been taught. We're getting fruit. But what you didn't know is that if you cook the peach, it's going to be sweeter than if you had eaten it off the tree. It is what it is. So those are the things that we have to think about. And of course, the less fiber you have, the more the spike. Because fiber, along with other factors like fat and protein, you combine it with the fruit, it actually blunts that spike. So fruit with more fiber may not spike you as much. So something else to keep in mind. And then exercise. I know Coach Bronson is really encouraging us to exercise, and our other muscular guests here today that this crazy keto is salivating over. And that's another man I need to talk to after this presentation. Not sure what kind of cruise this is, but I'm starting to get nervous. So if you took Coach Bronson's advice and you exercise, what would happen is if my wife gives herself a shot, it's going to make that insulin absorb a little faster. And then if you exercise and you're sweaty, you go take a hot shower, it's going to also increase the absorption of insulin. So think about all of these factors my wife has to think about when she's just existing, which is why she was so upset when she was diagnosed, because she has to think about all of these things. And just this morning, we're thinking about the continuous glucose monitor, where we're going to put it, and you have to think about the injection site, and where you put it affects its absorption as well. So a lot of things to think about, and it's okay because that's just what it is. Everybody, no matter if you have a diagnosis or not, has to think about what you eat. It's just something you have to put in perspective. It seems like you have a free pass, but we know there are people who are thin who are unhealthy, and they eat crazy, and they think they're fine, and then next thing you know, something catastrophic occurs. So let's go through a few lessons. Since I was taking notes with my Dr. Vega gave us some, the 10 things, 11 things we have to think about. I'm just going to give you a few things to think about. And the first is what we talked about already, which is I learned that glycemic variability is a problem. And if you live in a world where you're spiking constantly, which is a traditional American are spiking, they're always up and down, and it doesn't just affect your risk for, mortality down the road, it also affects your mood. So if you have an up and down blood sugar, you have an up and down mood. How good is that for a marriage? How do you have 31 years and be happy if there's an up and down mood? And truth be told, if you haven't heard this stat, people with uncontrolled diabetes have a way higher divorce rate than people who have control. Seriously. So this is literally going to save your marriage, to not have glycemic variability. That's the first lesson we do not want to see. And again, when you think about fructose, you make it very difficult when you eat these types of foods to achieve a lower number of variability. Number two is sweetness. Fructose is sweeter. Fructose is like a monosaccharide, just like glucose, but it's so weird because fructose is actually sweeter than glucose, and it's actually sweeter than table sugar, which is sucrose, which is very interesting. So it's very sweet on the sweetness scale, and it has an impact on your body that's greater. And metabolic health, I call myself the metabolic health doctor, and it's intentional. I remember when we were discussing, when you're kind of messaging out there, as I talked to my wife about it, she said, you should focus on low carb, keto, carnivore, etc. And I said, no, we have to socialize this term because a lot of people don't know what this term means, and a lot of clinicians don't. So I really thought it was important to socialize this term. And I have it on this slide because it's important that there are people who are metabolically healthy who may be able to tolerate fruit. Dr. Paul Saladino would be one. How many hours, how much exercise do you think Dr. Paul Saladino does? It's a lot. And I don't think we're going to be surfing out here right now, but my understanding is that maybe 1 or 2 hours of surfing every day, and that sounds kind of hard. That sounds like, so in that setting, fruit is probably okay. My patients on the south side of Chicago, I don't think so. No. So, and this is really important because metabolic health arguably is the number one cause of most of the chronic medical conditions that we can think of. For example, when you think about dementia and heart attacks and things like that, it's due to poor metabolic health. So the goal with this slide is to remind you that yes, if you're metabolically healthy, it's okay, but if you're not, you need to be careful. What percentage of Americans are metabolically healthy? Anybody know?
7.
Exactly. It was 12, it's down to 7, depending on the study, but I think that was from Tufts, right? So 93% of our friends and family are not metabolically healthy. People who are here who just started their journey are probably not metabolically healthy. Many of you may have achieved that because you've been doing this dietary pattern, but achieving metabolic health will be critical in order for us to be healthy, and it's very difficult to do that if you consume a lot of fruit. Now let's look at this ideal of oxidative stress, and it's such a funny thing. I remember when we were at a conference in Vegas, and it was not a low carb, just a regular conference, and they were celebrating the fact that alcohol was this like health food, like a glass a day, right? But and again, so when I tell patients, if you like alcohol, you can have a glass a day, and it's probably going to have some health benefits. However, if you're not a drinker, you don't start drinking alcohol to become healthy. Does that make sense? That doesn't make sense. Because alcohol in excess can cause oxidative stress, and fructose in excess can cause oxidative stress. So they're telling us to consume fruit to reduce. It's an antioxidant, but it can also cause oxidative stress. So you have to be careful when you're getting these messages, because too much of something is probably going to be harmful. And of course, there are antioxidants in your body. When I got my master's in nutrition and functional medicine, I was kind of shocked to know that, we have antioxidants in our body already. I thought you had to get it from the fruit, the vitamin A's and the E's and things of that nature. And so you have glutathione and uric acid. They're made naturally in your body. The key is, do you really need the fruit to give you those antioxidants? And the answer is not really if you live a low inflammatory lifestyle. So if my lifestyle is low in inflammation, then I don't need all these antioxidants because my body makes antioxidants already, and that's probably sufficient to keep me healthy. That's why people who take on this dietary pattern, when you do their SED rates and their C-reactive proteins, these inflammatory markers, they plummet because they don't have the inflammation anymore. And the same person that was just doing this for diabetes will be shocked and amazed when their joint pain is better, when they don't have headaches anymore, and their reflux. I mean, there's the whole list of things that occur. And one of my dinner buddies for this crew, Scott, had a list of things. A list. It was longer than a piece of paper. So he will be a future guest on my podcast because I want to share his healing story. And most of those things he didn't even know got better until people would point it out, or he'd listen to a podcast and hear about, oh yeah, that happened to me too. Oh yeah. So it's really amazing. That happened to me as well. So talking about nutrients for a moment. So a lot of people say you have to eat the fruit because you have to get those nutrients. And one of the ones that always comes up in the low-carb and carnivore community is vitamin C, right? Now, we're on a ship, and we've heard stories about those sailors who were at the bottom. Anybody at the bottom of the ship right now? I'm not sure. But those folk were not giving access to fruit. I know we all are. And they would get scurvy, right? Because they had vitamin C deficiencies. But it's a little overrated because the reality is, even though the USDA, well, if you Google, if we all had access to the internet right now, we Googled, we don't, most of us don't, and we Googled like vitamin C in meat, it would probably say how much? 0. But is that really true?
Nope.
No. So you do get vitamin C from beef and a little bit more from organ meat like liver. But the most important thing is that glucose, vitamin C, one of its primary functions is to help metabolize glucose, right? So if we need vitamin C to metabolize glucose, and we're eating a minimum amount of it, then maybe we don't need as much vitamin C after all. And that's why carnivores do not have scurvy, and certainly I haven't had it yet, and many of you haven't had it yet, and that's because your body works metabolically completely differently. In fact, your body is so metabolically efficient that the little vitamin C that's in your beef and in your liver will be utilized more efficiently. So again, we have a lot of research to do in the carnivore community in particular, but the reality is you'll get enough vitamin C. I have not seen anybody complain of that in my practice or elsewhere. And then of course, all the nutrients that you need, as you already know, are, from a macronutrient perspective, are essential fatty acids and essential amino acids, none of which are in the carb category. Therefore, there's nothing really essential to live that you get from fruit. So if you're eating fruit because you think it's important for your nutrients, that's really been debunked already. So just keep that in mind as well. Now, the electrolyte issue is one of the factors I think Dr. Paul Saladino was concerned about, because he's so active, he's sweating, and he complained of getting cramping and having problems with his sleep. And when you look at studies, you do struggle with your sleep. So if you're a person who's doing keto, low carb, or carnivore, and you're starting to have problems with your sleep, and you're probably not having problems on the ship, but because I have definitely slept better on the ship as well, you'll find that the electrolytes may be the missing piece. So, and when you think about the American Heart Association and other organizations, they want you to get your salt down to 1,500 grams a day. It's a very small number, but if you listen to experts who like Stephen Finney with Verta Health, he would say people on keto should probably do at least 5 to 6 grams per day of salt. Think about that. So what does that mean for Dr. Paul Saladino? With him being so athletic and sweating, he probably needs even more. So of course that makes sense for him, but again, we're not surfing, so it may not make sense for us. And so the question is, would you prefer to balance that out, because carbohydrates attract water. It has the word hydrate, right? So carbohydrates attract water and salt into your body, right? So if you eat fruit, you will hold on to more salt, where low carb make you, excrete salt from the kidneys. So the question is, would it be better to just maximize your electrolyte supplementation if that's the issue, or to add fruit? And the answer to me is, I would not want to add the other stuff that comes with fruit in order to achieve that goal. Again, if you're very healthy, you're one of those 7%, you're athletic, then you're probably fine, but just keep that in mind as well. Now, the other thing that's really important, and I know Dr. Troll talks about sugar addiction a lot. Sugar addiction is a real thing, and it's really important that we don't put ourselves in harm's way. So if I raise my blood sugar, which will then raise my insulin, and then the insulin lowers my blood sugar, it's going to be likely that I'm going to start to have issues with a trigger. It's going to trigger me to want something else. So if you keep your blood sugars more level, you're not likely to get triggered, which is why people with sugar addiction, people like Dr. Joan Iflin, that talks about processed food addiction, they should probably not test the whole fruit paradigm. And then hunger is another thing. Hunger is a real big issue, and again, when hunger is part of your story, and one of the reasons why you struggle is because you're always hungry. One of the things we love about, literally the only time I really eat breakfast is when on a cruise ship or if I'm working from home. Otherwise, I'm not hungry, so I don't eat. So I think one of the greatest gifts about keto and carnivore and low carb in general is that you don't get hungry unless you're an outlier. Plant toxins are important issues because I personally had an irritable bowel that got me into this space, and honestly, I just can't tolerate the toxins in plants. I just can't. So if I have somebody in front of me who has problems with the toxins and the anti-nutrients, they need to maybe consider another path. Fiber has always been touted. I mean, when you go and get a master's in nutrition, what do they talk about in class? Fiber, fiber, fiber. And but my body can't tolerate fiber, fiber, fiber. In fact, if I eat a lot of fiber, my wife and my table guests at the would not want me to be sitting next to them because I'm going to be bloated and I may be a little gassy. And of course, when you grow fruit in America, there's going to be a lot of pesticides. So keep in mind, the fruit are just different. And then, okay, I kind of made a mistake. I didn't plan to mention Dr. Ben Bigman a second God dog it. Maybe you guys need to talk to my wife about me and Dr. Ben Bigman also. But physiologic insulin resistance is what I learned from Dr. Ben Bigman. And what it is, as you can see, a state where insulin targeting tissues have reduced responsiveness to high levels of insulin. In English, all that means is that when you are low carb or keto or carnivore, you're not consuming a lot of glucose, so your body's not making a lot of insulin. What happens when you finally need the insulin? Sometimes the insulin's kind of sleeping, dormant, not doing much, and you got to wake it back up. So it's called physiologic insulin resistance. The good news is that when you start to consume those foods again on a cruise ship, and we did have, you guys had desserts a couple of times, right? And that's okay. We're totally okay with that. Your body responds fairly quickly. There is nobody's dying from physiologic insulin resistance. So if you see this really smart podcast where people are talking about and they're concerned, it's way overrated. I would not worry about that. So glycation and ketosis are factors that you have to think about with fructose. Fructose and galactose. Galactose is from milk, and basically they're more glycating, and they're 8 to 10 times more glycating than other sources of sugar like glucose. Glycation is when you have non-enzymatic, sticking of glucose to things like protein and fat. And glycosylation is when you have enzymatic, ATP-driven sticking of sugar to our cells. At the end of the day, these can all lead to advanced glycation end products, inflammatory cascades, sticking of your glucose to a lot of the things in your body. But more in particular, fructose is converted in your liver to fat cells. So people who consume a lot of fructose can have an increased risk for obesity, and that same fat in your liver leads to insulin resistance, which will then increase your risk for diabetes. So again, these are things that are not necessarily going to happen in a metabolically healthy person, but most of our friends and family are not metabolically healthy. On the south side of Chicago, I have a lot of elderly patients. Most of my patients are somewhere between 65 and up, and they are typically going to have more trouble with the anti-nutrients in fruit than others, and it's kind of weird for them to hear that, but it's true. And then there's these difference in tolerance, and some people have a dietary intolerance to fructose where they can't, like, it irritates their gastrointestinal tract, and then you have other people who have a genetic intolerance, and they literally don't make the enzymes to help them break down fructose. So there's a subpopulation of people who should also be more careful. And then we get into the ancestral conversation, and all of our ancestors in the past had access to fruit, but the key is they had limited access to fruit. And on a cruise ship, you have unlimited access. Back at home, you have unlimited access. And I just think that access is the problem. And then the fruit of today is genetically modified to be sweeter, and you have a whole set of other issues with that. And most importantly, I just think that environment is important. So Dr. Paul Saladino is in a tropical environment. How many people live in a tropical environment? A few, right? So the fruit they eat may be slightly better, potentially, right? But the fruit most Americans eat are not in that category. So that's another thing you want to keep in mind. And then I want to briefly talk about your risk for high insulin. When you are spiking your blood sugar, it's really problematic. And I just want to give you a sense of what that can look like in reality. So I want you to do an audience participation here. So whenever I say a disease, you say, because of high insulin levels, okay? Let's do it. So let's start with one that has hit our family, dementia. So dementia, which is type 3 diabetes, is caused from high insulin. Hypertension is not a salt disease, it's caused by high insulin levels. We know diabetes is caused by high insulin levels. And I hate to say it, dear, but I'm going to say it. Erectile dysfunction, high insulin levels. 80% of most chronic medical conditions are caused from high insulin levels. And guess what? The dietary pattern we're talking about in this cruise is going to result in low insulin levels. So I just wanted to put that in front of you as well. And so, so if you're insisting on eating fruit, that's okay. Just make sure you're aware that the ripeness of the fruit is important. How long you cook it is important. What you combine it with is important. If it's processed. I used to be a big fan of smoothies. I'm not as much of a big fan because you're breaking it down. Of course, some fruit are higher or lower in the glycemic index, so I'll speak to that in a moment. And then let's talk about who should avoid fruit, the ones who are not metabolically healthy, which is what we talked about. Those who need to stay in ketosis, people who have epilepsy, people who have mental health conditions, they need to stay in ketosis. So I would, make sure that they do that. And of course, our meters, our continuous glucose meters, are our best way to judge if we are or aren't. And then there are those who could we have athletes, we have people with good genes, etc., and of course the metabolic health story. So here are just examples. We all know that the berries are low in the glycemic index. All of us know that the avocados are good. Yes, those are fruit, coconut, and of course olives. Those are things we want to be thinking about. So again, we want to give people permission to eat fruit periodically, to indulge periodically, but we have to know who we are and if we should do that. So this is not Dr. Paul Saladino, I don't think, but the goal is to say that may be okay for him, but it may not be okay for you. And finally, I want you guys to be thoughtful about everything you learn and you hear. There is no one answer for anybody. There are some carnivores who need to be like Dr. Anthony Chafee and very strict. If not, they get sick. And then you have people who have a little bit more wiggle room and they can be a version of that or a version of keto. Do not come here, and this is not a cult. We're not crazy. Do what works for you, because the best experiment you can do on yourself is an N of 1. And I've learned that personally, and I want you to do the same. So I really appreciate you guys giving me an opportunity to share my message.
Don't you appreciate Dr. Hampton? Can you give him another round of applause? He's pretty easy on the eyes as well. Oh, my husband's back.